regards to my post this morning. And I might probably wait for a couple days to post this, so if you don't get it in a couple days, it's only because I'm trying to let things sink in a little bit and take our time in addressing some of these subjects, right? So for those of you that don't know my history, I think it's a good time to kind of broach that. I started training dogs when I was 12. I wanted to train dogs when I was 8. It was all I wanted to do, right? So that being the case, at 8 years old, and it's like a lot of kids, I was watching Rin Tin Tin, Lassie, and all the TV shows, and I just fell in love with it. And I knew what I wanted to do at a very young age. So I ended up getting a dog, my first dog. I was way out in a ranch, and I got my first dog at 12 years old. A little Australian Shepherd Dingo mix. I call her a Dingo, but she's a cattle dog mix. Farmer gave them to me from down the way, and so I had this small little female Aussie, great dog, and started going after it because I knew what I wanted to do already. I wanted to train dogs, so I built my relationship, and I just got high on it and started reading books. And back then we didn't have much, so I was just doing it, you know. And I didn't have any mentors, didn't have anybody to show me anything. I was just bonding with my dog and having a relationship between the two of us. And so that being the case, I kind of felt and sensed everything. It was what I call the gut feeling of dog training. I sensed what I should be doing. I didn't have anybody to tell me what I was doing right or wrong. I just kind of built my own ability to communicate with the dog, right? And it was a very cool thing. So I went on and trained her to do all kinds of tricks, and got into sensing and understanding that she understood my voice tone and my body language, and the books didn't cover that subject, so I was doing a lot of experimenting. You know, I was a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid, you know, as I raised this dog. So I got into a period of experimenting to a point where I was saying, okay, how many words can I teach this dog? How many words can she learn? And then I started getting cute and putting vocabulary into it as well. You know, how many words can I teach her? And then how many hand signals can I add to it? So every one of my commands had a vocabulary, the command with the hand signal. And I came up with a lot of these hand signals on my own, you know. I didn't have anybody to tell me what was right or wrong. I didn't have a AKC class I was doing this on my own. So even my hand signals today are a little bit bastardized, right? I do things you may not see. The hand signal may not be that familiar to some people, but they're very functional. You know, I throw it down over my head instead of putting my hand up in the air and keeping it there and in a straight and saying down. I bring it up over my head and I make a sweeping motion downwards. Again, body language that the dog's going to pick up on, right? So I did all that, and I got to a point where she had over 250 words I logged that she knew that had vocabulary to go with it. Roll over, crawl, limp. I could actually tell her to shake, like shaking water off her back, and limp all the way across the room. And I was pretty proud of myself back then. And now you got other trainers that are making me look sad. They do some amazing things. There's one guy that just, with Monkey, that Malinois, that guy's good. So I did my thing, and then at about 16, I ended up getting a German Shepherd, and I wanted to do protection. I was getting a little older, and you know, the hormones are hitting you, and protection was just starting to get into our country. You know, it was just starting to come over, and so I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to do bite work. So I ended up taking that German Shepherd, and I knew I wanted to be a professional trainer. So I got that German Shepherd, and I went out and I did everything I had done with that little Australian Shepherd, and I did even more. I started wanting to do bite work and things. So I started to go and order equipment online. And back then, the equipment was just archaic. It was like, I remember back then it was hard to find it. And then finally, I got what I needed, and I ended up training my friends to do the job of the decoy work out of Kohler's guard dog training book. And that's the only reference I had to protection training back then in my little small town. So I did it that way, and to this day I've got a couple things out of that book I still use. I set a good trigger. I want that dog to go from 0 to 60 on just a word, and there's a lot of, you know, peekaboo, all that stuff that I got out of that book I put to good use, and I did a pretty good job without having any experience, and my friends did an okay job, you know. All things considered, looking back, it was probably pretty bad, but you know. So then I knew what I wanted to do. I was 16 years old. I went out and I used that dog as my demo dog to get me a job. And so it was important that the dog worked, and I did all my little fancy stuff, and I went out to a local dog trainer that gave classes in the parks. And back then, that's what they did. They gave classes in parks. And nowadays, you don't see as much of that. The big store chains have kind of taken the belly out of the market, and most people walk into the stores to get their product, and they get swayed into the training through Petco or PetSmart or wherever it may be. So I ended up going down there and giving a little bit of a demo and putting myself forward to get a job with them. Well, it worked. I ended up getting a job, and I worked for them, and the gentleman was out of the military, and he had his business built on heel, sit down, stay, come and finish. We did a lot of problem solving, and back then it was the old standard stuff. I mean, a dog digging, you go over and you drown the dog in the hole, and because that's all we knew back then, and this is back in the 70s. So did our thing with him, and I worked with him for 2 years, and all I wanted to do was bite work, and that's all I talked about, right? And they knew it, they knew that passion. So the owner of that company had some connections up in the Bay Area in a training firm by the name of ProTrain. ProTrain was one of the biggest facilities back in the 80s. I graduated December 79. So you can imagine that that was my time period. The reason I know that is because I got my German Shepherd, and I had him with me in 1980, December 79, and that last year, 1980, I took off to Oakland probably 2 weeks after I graduated. Right? Excuse me. Sergeant was born December 79. That's my time span. And I graduated in 80. So I had that year to play with him, get the job with them, and work with them. And I worked with them for a couple of years, and then I took off to Oakland. I got him a bus and left him back at home and took a bus to Oakland, not knowing anybody. Little white boy going I think we had 2 African Americans in my town. Took off to Oakland, and because that's all I cared about, remember? And the guy that was going to hire me met me at the bus station on San Pablo Avenue in Oakland. You want to talk about culture shock? That was definitely some culture shock, boy. I got off that bus, and if anybody knows about Oakland, San Pablo is where all the inner city's at. You're talking all the hookers and the bars, and it's a pretty rough side of town. It's like being South Central in LA, same thing. And over the years, as I've gone along, almost a lot of the times you end up being in the armpit of the cities, because that's where you can get away with having a kennel, and dogs can bark and they can do all that, and nobody's going to get upset about it. So same thing with Caesar's place on 163rd in South Central. That's why he got that place and was able to have it, because again, who's going to complain about all the dogs barking and everything in that environment and get away with it, right? So I worked for them for 2 years. I eat, breathe, and sleep dog in the back of the kennel. I had my mentor, believe it or not, his name was OJ, African American out of Chicago. He was a Vietnam vet. He went through the military and was a scout with a guy that's on the point with the dogs in the jungle warfare type of work. He was out front. So I learned a lot more about what I didn't know as a naive white kid, about prejudice and about a lot of other things. It was a great experience. Like I said, I was there about 2 years. So OJ taught me an awful lot, and he taught me in a different manner. You won't see anybody teach like I teach when I talk about protection, because I'm teaching more about where it all came from, understanding the science of a dog, what makes him tick, prey, play, Never heard about channeling drives until Schutzen came in and really got established, and then they started talking about channeling drives. And I look at it differently, but I'm doing the same thing. I'm channeling drives. So I ended up doing real good there, but I wanted to go back home. My girlfriend was back there. I was homesick, everything else. So I ended up going home after a couple years, and I ended up starting my own business. Right? So that was my first business, and over the years, as life goes along, I ended up terminating that one about 5 or 6 years as I went along, and then I got a job here, and you got to survive, and that's kind of the way our society is nowadays. You're just trying to survive and get by. And so over the years, I have started probably 3 different dog training businesses, kept them going for a length of time, and then for whatever reason, maybe got a better job offer. I was a security guard for Watson Pharmaceuticals, and I was getting good money there. And I had so many hours I was doing, working graveyard shifts, working flip-flop shifts, all kinds of things that didn't allow me to train the dog. So when I lost the dog that I got from Caesar by the name of Thunder, he ended up passing away around 14, 15 years old. And so that whole time period of working with Caesar, when I went to LA, was interesting. I went to LA after doing my business, and then I went to LA and to get into car sales of all things. That didn't work out. I ended up working in a pet store and working my way up from the ground up, and became a manager and actually opened one of the largest stores for a major pet store chain in LA at the time, back in the day. They're not around anymore, but they ended up having 11 stores. So I became the training manager. I moved from store to store, and I worked with the employees, teaching them theft control and sales. Took Salesman of the Year 2 years in a row because it's all about knowing your product. Educate the customer, fill the need. It's not that big a deal, right? So I've always been that type. I've always been the type that I'm very assertive, and I don't mind starting at the bottom. You work somewhere, you don't come in and say, I want to be the boss. You come in and you build your relationships, and you work with them, and you make them realize the value of what you have to give, and over time you end up working yourself up to a position. The security guard position, same thing. I worked security ops. I used to sit the bench and watch all the cameras. We had over 300 cameras, alarm systems everywhere. As a pharmaceutical company, we were dealing with a lot of the opiates, right? You ever hear of Norco? Norco is a street name for an opiate that is on the street. It's called Norco, but that name was stamped on the tablet coming from pharmaceutical. That was the street name of the drug. It was actually the name of the drug that the manufacturer gave it. And it's a town where I lived in the LA area. So those of you in LA know where Norco is at, right? And now Watson Pharmaceutical repositioned themselves. They brought in a corporate raider, and Watson Pharmaceuticals is no longer along. It's now Pfizer. They bought every time they buy a company, they push themselves away from the problem with the opiates, and then they knew what was coming. And so when they got done with all that, and they bought this company, then another company, each time they do that, they would market with that other company and get farther away from the situation with the opiates that they had been a big part of, right? Well, they're now Pfizer, and you know that Pfizer paid out a lot for that whole opiate, but the reason they paid it out is because of the fact that they were a big part of that whole opiate problem, and they're the ones that were a big part of it, and they knew that. So they ended up just doing the right thing, and they paid it out. So I no longer work for that company because they had about 1,500 of us lost our jobs, and as they repositioned and redid their thing, went offshore, and I mean the whole 9 yards is our normal corporate tendencies. If you ever notice corporates that kind of follow what each other do, you know what I mean? And that was the age of going offshore and doing all this stuff, right? So whatever. So that's not nothing about dogs, but that's kind of my history. I've just been that way. So dog training has been a big part of my life, and it's who I am. And now you've heard me talking about one of my big pet peeves, and the kids in LA know about it because I'm always mentioning it. And they are jealous. They have a tendency to hate my guts and everything else because I'm always frank and honest. And I really believe in my industry. It's who I am as an individual because this has been my whole life. Right? I've seen the industry change and go through all its evolution, and it's still going through evolution. It never stops. And it's a cool thing, but at the same time, I've got a big pet peeve about these kids going out and saying, "Poofed, I'm a trainer," because of social media and being able to create a digital media presence and fool the public, making them think that they really know what they're doing. So here's my point. Let me go ahead and cut this a little short, and I'll do another video talking about it. We need to, as an industry, as a group of people, those that are out there that are professionals, been doing it long enough, we need to create a peer pressure that makes these kids realize that they can't do this and get away with it. Do we want to get licensing? I don't agree with licensing. I really don't. I think we can do it, though. They need to learn. They need to mentor under somebody. Go out and work with somebody for a couple years. Either work for them and get paid a wage. There's plenty of people that want to hire kids, right? And they will let you learn and grow, but you're going to have to work. You're going to have to get off the bench and actually go back in the back of that kennel, scoop shit, and work your way up. That's the way it was done years. Internships, all that stuff. And nowadays, because of technology and because of the internet, these kids get away with just hanging out a shingle and going poof on them, and they don't have a clue. They really don't. So take it from me. If you're going to really be a professional, how would you do it? Work your way into doing it several ways. Either work for somebody to get paid a wage as a beginner and start from the bottom up and work your way up. Work for somebody for a couple, 2-3 years. Earn your bona fides, right? And or go to a school like Michael Ellis's or whatever. If you folks can afford it or whatever, you can get the fee to be able to pay them a class fee. At least go through a course. And even me, I would think that even when you did that and you got your certificate, I would suggest that you don't come out and just go hang up a shingle, right? I would still want you to go out and intern under somebody and go get a job and work for somebody for a couple years. Earn it, work for it. That's the way I've done it. That's why I have such an attitude, because that's the way I did it. I've worked up and down the California coast, and I've been in many different facilities and taken my role to work for them. And I like to look at it, and I've said it before, that I'm the secret in the back room, right? In other words, companies hire me. Right now where I'm at, I'm subcontracting for somebody else, right? He got the gig, he got the client, and he sent me to do the job. Is it good money? Am I having a good time? Hell yeah, you can't beat it. So all that being said, I would suggest you earn it, right? And you'll have a lot more respect from your peers. It's people like Carlos Ramirez that did it that way. He went out and he worked with Mike Reavers. What the heck is his name? Whatever. He's been there and done that, right? He's earned his way. You know, he's earned what he's got. And he's one of the best decoys in the United States right now. You know, he goes out and does all those seminars with law enforcement. Got his facility back in Florida. I've got respect for those type of people. People that have earned it and went out of their way to work and do what they need to do to earn their bona fides, right? They don't just say, poof, I'm a trainer. Go out and catch a couple dogs, work for about a year, and you got a good hot dog, and you think you're all that. You get certified maybe in Canine Street League or PSA or whatever it is, and because you're out there catching a dog in a suit and you're hanging around all your group of friends, you think you're a trainer, and you go, poof, I'm a trainer. It's wrong. It's not right for the public, because you really don't know what you're doing. And when the public brings you their job, believe me, they have most of the time screwed that dog up in the head from ignorance and lack of understanding about dog psychology. And you need to look at it and be able to step back and figure out, what do I need to do to tweak this training program to make it work for that individual dog, right? Just like this one, okay? He's in the back right now, and he's a spoiled brat. They haven't done anything wrong with that dog, and the dog's got some darn good genetics. That's a Russian Dobie. That's a good dog, and he's a great dog. They haven't screwed up the dog in the head that much, so it's a kind of a clean canvas. You know, it's an open canvas for me to work with, and then I've got the client I'm working with here. But the myriads and multitudes of things that will come at you, caused by the customer and their dog, and the difference in the genetics and what the dog is and what they've created, is exponential. It's so varied, it's not even funny. And your job is to kind of analyze it, step back from it, and get in the dog's head, and then be able to make it work and get your dog trained for that customer. And then, more importantly, to educate the customer so they start to understand what they've done wrong, change their behavior so they don't keep it up, and then produce a product, meaning that finished product. That's what I'm doing right now with this customer. When I get done, this customer is going to be able to understand what I've done, how I've done it, and be able to handle that leash in such a way that she's going to look good. And I always tell my customers, if you look good, I look good, right? Very important. So, all right, this is a little long-winded. I'll get out of here, but I'll do a few of these yak sessions. You guys have a good day. Mark Ferrasci, ProTech Dog Training, signing off. All right, Echo, let's go, buddy. Let's go. We ready? Are we ready? All right, let's go.